Where we're at tonight, we'll get right into it. 2 Chronicles chapter 36. 2 Chronicles chapter 36 as we continue through the Bible. As mentioned this morning, as you look at the scriptures, and it really impressed me even more when we're on vacation as we're spending time together, how the Bible really is a story of God's grace. And how when you come to grips with God's grace in your own life personally, how it changes you. You move from a law relationship to a place where you got to do things to be acceptable before God. And then in turn, you go to a God that loves you, and you understand that there's nothing you could do to deserve that love, but he just loves you as his child. And I think maybe that impressed me as I was with my kids, how I just simply love them for who they are. And how much more does our Heavenly Father just love us as the people that we are? The sad thing with the nation of Israel, they had all the opportunity that you could put to them to know God's love. And isn't the whole Old Testament a story of long-suffering of God and how he was so patient with the kings? And so where we left off last week, and as we saw, Josiah was a good king last week, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord as he had those marvelous years during his reign. But however, the king before him, you remember him? He was Manasseh. And he did such horrible, wicked things as they were just spiraling down as a nation, that the judgment of God was going to come upon them. And as Hezekiah really felt devastated when he understood what the Word of God had to say, and this prophetess, Huldah, came to him and said to to Josiah, he says, you know what? Judgment is going to come. It's going to come onto the nation for the things that they've done and how they misrepresented God. He says, but it's not going to happen in your lifetime. It's going to happen after you die. And so that's where we kind of left the story after last week at the death of Josiah, the last good king. And now we see that there's an immediate plunge of the nation right down and out. In verse 1, and the people of the land took Jehoahaz, the son of Josiah, and made him king in the father's stead in Jerusalem. And Jehoahaz was 23 years old, and he began to reign, and he reigned how long? 3 months in Jerusalem. And the king of Egypt put him down at Jerusalem and condemned the land in 100 talents of silver and the talents of gold. And the king of Egypt made Alcachim, his brother, king over Judah and Jerusalem, and turned his name to Jehoiakim. And Necho took Jehoahaz, his brother, and carried him away. And so now we're seeing this Pharaoh Necho, who was down in Egypt. We have to get our lands properly. He killed their father Josiah in the battle of Megiddo last week. Remember, the battle was going on, it was raging on, and Josiah decided to stick his nose in there. You know, as he went out, they said, I'm going to go to battle. I'm going to, we're going to win. And as we mentioned, he did something that so often we do, is that we forget to consult the Lord. We, get ahead of the Lord. In this case, it cost him his life as an arrow hit him, and he died there upon the land. And so now this Pharaoh is placing a tribute upon the land. We think that we have taxes. Oh my goodness, they had tremendous taxes that were unbearable. And so now what he does, he places his guy, Jehoiakim, in the place of authority. And it tells us in verse 5, and Joachim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did that which was what? Evil in the sight of the Lord. And against him came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in feathers and carried him to Babylon. This once mighty nation. If you go back in the Chronicles, if you go back in the Kings and you read at the beginning of the nation, you go, oh my goodness, nobody's going to touch them. Do you remember when King David was running? All these surrounding nations were afraid of Israel. They didn't want anything to do with them. But when you get nation, and certainly as individuals, as we get our eyes off the Lord, you could see what can happen to them. And as the now bound in fetters, and he carried him to Babylon. The king is now gone. He's been displaced, and now they've taken him away, and they take him into that place known as Babylon. I think, of course, in this period of history, the Syrians had pretty much been conquered by Babylon. Remember last week, it was the Assyrians that we were seeing in power. And so what we have is two major powers still on the scene. You still had Egypt down to the south, and also you got Babylon up there in the north. And what lies in between them? Jerusalem. And so when they would go to war against each other, they would find this common battleground. If you have a chance, look at your map someday between Babylon and Egypt, and they would find themselves there in Jerusalem fighting it out. Why bring the war to your own country, right? And so that's where they were. And so they had this battleground. So first of all, as we know in scriptures and we know in history that Egypt was conquered. And now we're seeing that Jehoiakim was Babylon's came with his troops, and they conquered the city, taken away their captives. This is really the first dispersion. This is the first one that we see in the scriptures where they're carried away into Babylon. Do you remember who went away, carried away at this point? It was Daniel, and also the princesses that were there as they were carried away. So when we get to the book of Daniel, as you're studying Daniel, this is the time in history that he was taken away to Babylon. You have in this period, of course, is Ezekiel also, who was one of the first captives taken to Babylon. And Ezekiel, of course, wrote these tremendous prophecies concerning Babylon during this time and concerning Jerusalem that we'll see. But remaining there in Jerusalem, as the nation has fallen apart, it's no longer part of their glory, was the prophet Jeremiah. And Jeremiah became known as the weeping prophet. Jeremiah found favor really in the eyes of the Babylonians because Jeremiah was predicting to the nation of Israel and to the Jews that Babylon was going to come and take over the nation of Judah. He wasn't hiding from that. He was telling them the facts, the way things were going to happen. You know, sometimes speaking truth to somebody is very hard to do. But it tells us in 1 John there that we're supposed to speak the truth in what? In love. Jeremiah was speaking the truth to them concerning that if you would just kind of calm down everybody, if you won't revolt against Babylon as they would come with their army, he says they'll just let you live in the land. They won't take you away. If they would just simply listen to the truth that Jeremiah was saying. You know, sometimes truth is hard to hear, and you don't want to hear it. Today, my daughter, she loves me so much, she came and said, Daddy, and her husband came and said, can I have a talk with you? I go, what did I do? Did I do something wrong? And they wanted to speak to me about my health and what's going on with it, that I would take better care of it. And they were really concerned, and rightfully so. I should be concerned. And they said, we saw you last night. You went and got an ice cream cone. Don't you forget, Dad, that you're diabetic? And I'm going, oh, my goodness. The truth was spoken to me in love. And I just appreciate that so much. Jeremiah the prophet was speaking the truth to the nation, telling them that the worst things were underneath the reign of Zedekiah is going to happen to them. And when you look at them, remember how Zedekiah asked to speak to Jeremiah privately when we get to the book of Jeremiah. He's going to say, come on, Jeremiah, could you just tell us what's going to happen? And Zedekiah was just, kind of just wanting to hear good news, right? And would you please tell us? And Jeremiah said, well, if I tell you the truth, I know what you're going to do. You're going to put me to death. You're going to lock me up and throw away the key. But then Jeremiah did speak the truth to Zedekiah, how Babylon's going to come and he's going to destroy the city. In verse 7, And it says Nebuchadnezzar also carried off the vessels and the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in the temple there in Babylon. All the way back when they built the temple. How all the craftsmen, all the gold and the silver and everything that was donated, the building of the first temple, Solomon's temple, we like to call it, all that now that was down in the treasuries. As you remember the foolish king earlier when the Chaldeans came in and visited the land, and they were feeling so puffed up, so wonderful. He said, hey, could we take you down and show you our treasury also? Not a smart thing, because I think they went back to Babylon, the Chaldeans as they were known at that time, and they kept that. They knew that knowledge of that gold, and they knew that knowledge of that silver. And so when Nebuchadnezzar came in and took the city, they took all the vessels of the house of the Lord. A little side read for you to do is you can go to the book of Daniel, and you remember when that one guy, as he was ruling, and he had a great party one night, and what did he do? He called all the lords of the land to party with him. And as he was drinking, he says, hey, let's bring those vessels. Let's bring those cups. Let's bring everything that Nebuchadnezzar, as he conquered the land, brought back with us. And, of course, that's when the Lord stepped into that fella, Belshazzar. Remember what happened? Their finger came right in on the wall, and he said, many, many tekels Upharsis. He says, you've been weighed in the balance and found wanting. But this is the story that we see now that did not need to happen. Verse 8, now the rest of the acts of Joachim and his abominations, which he did, that which was found in him, behold, they're written in the books of the kings of Israel and Judah. And Joachim, notice there's a difference. He's got a chin, this guy. His son reigned in his stead. And Joachim was 8 years old, and he began to reign. And he reigned 3 months and 10 days in Jerusalem and did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord. I don't know what you could do when you're 8 years old, but obviously there was something that he saw. I think the die had been cast by his dad, and who knows the backstory on that. He says, and when the year was expired, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him to Babylon with the goodly vessels of the house of the Lord, and made Zedekiah his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem. So certainly by this time, sitting on the throne was no more than just a puppet. Somebody that was answering to what was happening there in Babylon, to his wishes, and this guy was Zedekiah. And of course, he was a wicked king, and he was just looking to take care of his own needs and his own wants, and not really the needs and wants of the people. And that's our prayer, not only for pastors, but for leaders of our land, that they would be more concerned about the congregations, more concerned about, here in our own city, the mayor would be concerned about the people of our cities and our governments. Zedekiah was none of that. Zedekiah was 1 and 20 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And he did that which evil in the sight of the Lord, his God, and humbled not himself before Jeremiah the prophet, speaking from the mouth of the Lord. As a prophet, a true prophet speaks, and I think it's important for us to note this. It's not the prophet, but as God has inspired their hearts to speak, they become that vessel in which God communicates his word to those that need to hear this. In this case, it was Zedekiah. And Jeremiah warned him over and over again, the faithfulness of God. He gave him the warning for him to repent and given him opportunity for him to return to the Lord. In verse 13, and he also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear by God, but he stiffed his neck and hardened his heart from turning unto the Lord God of Israel. He was just set in the path of sin. It's pretty sad. I don't know if you ever met people like this. When they go down the road of sin, You could talk to them till you're blue in the face, basically. But they're so engrossed with their sin, they won't hear it. But the thing that I've found out in my life, it's not my job to give up on them. It's not my job to quit praying for them. Because I also remember one day that I had a grandma that was about this tall. I don't know, she was pretty short. She was, I always had a Bible next to her, as I remember growing up. She crocheted a lot, and she was a neat lady. And as I walked in as a young kid, rebellion in my teens, thought I was a long-haired, doing what all long-haireds did back then. Believe it or not, I did at that time. She came on I didn't know she was even in town from Minnesota, and I went walking through the door, and she said, grabbed me by my beard. I had a beard, long hair and all that. And I reached down to give her a hug, and she shook me by my beard, my little grandma. And she says, when are you going to cut this hair, and when are you going to start going to church? You know, as Grandma Varsnick was her last name, said those words to me, that was the beginning. That was like a prophet speaking to me, that I was on that path, a road of the sin, that God was, wanting to intervene, wanting to speak to me. As you look back at your life, how many times did God send somebody to you? And praise God that we eventually listened to the voice of the Holy Spirit, and we responded to the call, and we received God, the Lord as our Lord and Savior. But Zedekiah had all that. He had that opportunity. Jeremiah the prophet speaking to him. But he was so filled with sin, he stiffened his heart, and he wouldn't listen to the word of God. And then he says, moreover, all the chief priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abomination of the heathens, and polluted the house of the Lord, which he had hallowed in Jerusalem. And so now the picture is taken. It's almost like a trickle-down effect. If the head guy is not walking with God, why should we? And they had got to a place where the things that they were transgression in, and you could take a look at Ezekiel and really see what they were doing. They had moved into their form of pornography. They were worshiping the gods of the land. And it talks about how they were just peeking through a hole back there as they were trying to see how they could worship like the heathens worship. The heathens were worshiping the sun god at that time. And Ezekiel, of course, was saying that, you guys, the high priests, are corrupt. It's so sad when the pulpit gets corrupt. The corrupting of the priesthood means more likely the corrupting of the people. Because they go to church and they go to the place of God to hear about the Lord. If they're not hearing about the Lord, what are they being taught? It's so sad. So sad to see what this was going on. And God said to Ezekiel, see what they're doing. And God spoke of the judgment should come upon them, because even the priests of God were committing an abomination right within the precinct of the temple, right by the Holy of Holies, right where they were supposed to be serving, and serving the people and honoring the Lord. They were worshiping a false god. Peter said, its time has come when judgment must begin in the house of the Lord. If judgment begins here, where will the ungodly appear? We make this mistake thinking that a man of God or a preacher, just because they put a cloth around their neck, or if they carry a Bible, that means that they're walking right with the Lord, and they're not immune from sin. I always, without a doubt, I covet your prayers. We need to be praying for the various churches that we see, and ministers. And I think it's like it tells us in the New Testament that we should pray one for another, that we should take time and pray for each other, that we might stay walking before the Lord, because God would have us to be really, truly, to be a witness of who he is. And that, to me, is the great downfall in the nation of Israel. How they've been called out to be a witness to the other nation, to the heathen nation, what God might do through them. And they failed so miserably. Zedekiah under his reign, and the priesthood were corrupted. And it tells us in verse 15, and the Lord God of their fathers sent to them by his messengers, rising up bedtimes and sending, or beat times, and because he had compassion on the people and on his dwelling place. I love verse 15. It really says that God loves these people. He loved the temple. He loved the meeting place. Can your mind go back when the temple first opened? The days of Solomon, the glorious times of fellowship, the times that we saw in Hezekiah where it says just in recent history there hasn't been a time of fellowship so sweet all the way back from the time of Solomon. God loved these people and he had compassion on them. This God sent messengers to them. Twice Jeremiah speaks about rising up early to bring them the message of God. Ezekiel was prophesying to them along with other minor prophets as we study here in a few months. Amos and the prophets were right there to remind them of the love of God and certainly the impending judgment that's going to come if they don't turn. God continues to deal with them because God loved them. And I love this verse where we read, and I have loved thee, the Lord said, with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness, I have drawn thee. God never gave up on them. They gave up on God. God continued to show his love to them, but they would not come. They would not hear. They wouldn't have anything to do with them. In verse 16, but they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misuse of his prophets until the wrath of the Lord arose against his people till there was no remedy. Meaning there was no more choices. There's no more ways out. He says, I did everything I could. I sent all the messengers, all the prophets that we see here throughout the Old Testament, reminding them of God's love, but yet they mocked the messengers of God. Proverbs 29, verse 1, we read, He being often reproveth, hardeth his neck, shall suddenly be destroyed, and that without remedy. He says, if we stiffen our neck, if we get to a place we won't listen to the conviction of the Holy Spirit, there's going to be no way out. They came to the place of no return, and they came to the place where God said, that's it. In Genesis, we read, in the time of Noah, where God said, my spirit will not always strive with man. But I'm so glad that God's spirit still strives with man. In our rebellious state, as we may mention earlier, how the Holy Spirit still convicted us and brought us to a place of saving grace. But I believe there's a day coming shortly where God's not going to continue to strive against our nation that wants to rebel against God. One of the areas I just look at that I'm at halt with is how our nation so freely wants to offer abortions to women across the country. And how we're no different than when they were worshipped at the Molech and everything else, and we want to rubber stamp it and say it's okay. I think there's a day of judgment that's coming upon this earth, and it's coming quickly. He says, there's not every day, not forever, I'm going to strive with man. As we go on in verse 17, he says, therefore he brought unto them the king of the Chaldeans, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon the young man or the maid and the old man, or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasuries of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and the princesses, all these he brought to Babylon. The city was totally sacked at this time. And the city was left and desolated and was in shambles. You know, when you go over to Israel today, if you happen to take a trip over there, if you've been there, and some of the digs that they uncovered go back to this period of time that you could still see the shattered pottery, the shattered buildings, that they never ever were able to rebuild of these houses. Again, it didn't need to happen this way. In verse 19, and they burnt the house of God, and they brake down the walls of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof, and them that escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were his servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, and the land had enjoyed her Sabbath. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. You go, what in the world's that verse all about? But he's talking about, of course, all the way back to the time of Jeremiah. Well, first of all, we want to make sure we take a look at Zedekiah had two things that were going on here. Where first of all, that he says that his eyes would be, that his kids, his boys would be slain right before his eyes. And the second thing about Zedekiah that we find out is that he'll be taken into the land, but he won't see the land. And so the story goes about Zedekiah is that when they were starting to break down the walls, here's this king, he starts trying to exit out the back door. As he tried to escape, fleeing down to Jericho, down the valley is Jericho, a long ways from Jerusalem, but it's straight down the hill where you can get there by foot. Well, they caught him, and they brought him back to Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar, before the king's eyes, King Zedekiah, they brought his boys before him, and they slew his boys right before him. And then after slaying his boys, it tells them they gouged his eyeballs out, and they took him away back to Babylon. He was there, but he couldn't see the land. So the prophecy was fulfilled, and as he was captain in Babylon where he could not see it. What did Jeremiah predict in our verses here? That Babylon would come into captivity for how long? How long would the nation of Israel be in captivity there? 70 years. And I think it's very interesting that they had been in the land for 490 years since Joshua led the people in the land. 490 years they were there when they went into the land flowing with milk and honey. But God had written a law and telling them it's really about the Sabbath. 6 days you can work, but on the Sabbath day, what were you supposed to do? You're supposed to rest. And so he said the same thing about the land. He says, 6 years you can grow your vegetables, grow your crops, do everything you want to do, and you'll be all prosperous, really make it good. But on the seventh year, you just need to let it go. And you'll have enough food because you have enough in your storehouse to supply you that seventh year. And actually, they had that seventh year for the poor. They could go and harvest. The next year, of course, the seventh year, there would still be some growing up, and that was supposed to be for the poor, so they could have food to be able to eat. But that didn't happen there at all, because it tells us that as we see throughout the history, even David, as much as we love David, didn't observe the seventh year. None of the kings did. It's kind of like one of those laws that you read, like, that really doesn't apply to me. What does it mean driving 65 miles an hour? That's not for me. That's for the other guy, right? But yet eventually it catches up to you. And that's what happens, is that they did it for this 490 years. And the Lord says, you know what you're going to do because you did not obey me? You're going to go into captivity for 70 years. For every year that you did not allow the land to lay fallow, that you're going to be able to have to pay that time there in captivity. That marvelous prophecy came to be. As you move to verse 22, as we go through here, these last couple verses, you have to understand now a time gap has happened. we'll see verses 22 and verse 23 as Ezra opens up with the exact same verses next week. How many years has now transpired? 70 years. We take a leap in time. So everybody is now behind us. The kings are gone, Nebuchadnezzar's gone, the prophets are gone. And it says, now, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth are the Lord's of the heavens given me, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah, who is there among you and all this people. The Lord is God, be with him and let him go. And so we have this very interesting fellow next week, Cyrus, somebody that God named a long time before he was born. We'll look at this next week. But the amazing thing is how it all starts coming together. Even though they were in captivity, did God give up on them? Because his promises were true. As we see that he will always have that heart for the nation of Israel. And there will be a day that's coming, in 400 years after our period right here, there's going to be a man that's going to come and appear on the scene. His name is Jesus. And I believe that's a direct result of God's love that he has for us. He says man couldn't, anything man puts their hands to do, they end up corrupting it, as we saw through 1 Kings and 2 Kings and the Chronicles. Anything they do might get good for a little while, but man has a tendency to go back to their sinful nature. That's why we need Jesus. That's why Jesus said in John 3, you must be what? You must be born again, because you need the Spirit of God in you to help you to live for the Lord the way he would have you to live. I hope next week as we gather together that you might come and invite your friends, even though I think it might be harvest next week. I can't remember. If it is, we'll still be here studying God's Word. Come on out as we journey through the Bible together. I was going to write down for me when we started Genesis. Maybe some of you were with us here on Sunday nights when we started Genesis 1. Isn't it fun just to go through the Bible? And that's what we're going to continue doing at Agape Chapel. Learning not only from man's mistakes, learning from our own mistakes, that we serve a loving God, a very gracious God that loves us even this day. Amen. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I thank you.
One small child in a land of 1,000, one small dream of a Savior tonight, one small hand reaching out to the stars.